Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. As usual, I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, man. Excited to take on today's topic. Hopefully we can spread a little bit of knowledge to the listeners here. Today's topic, we're going to talk about showcases, camps, clinics, and break that down. Different types of camps, when guys are ready, value in different ones. I know we both have our stances on the value of a few of these, so I think we'll get it started here. I'll kick it over to you to kickstart this conversation.
Yeah, the first one we'll talk about tonight is just the straight up kind of on campus camps that pretty much every single school in the country is going to have, right? They're going to have multiple camps. Some are going to be, most of them are probably going to be in the fall. But there are summer camps. There's going to be fall. There's some winter ones. The big thing, and I think, you and I agree on this, the on-campus camp is probably the best one out there to go to for multiple reasons. One, it has the built-in school visit. So you're going to get on campus, you're going to be able to walk around the campus. Most camps nowadays do come with campus tours and such, but on the flip side, I think some people out there will actually set things up with admissions, and you could always go through admissions yourself as well. So you have that built-in campus visit. You're going to work directly with the staff that is actually coaching at that school. So you're going to get a really good feel for, is this staff a staff that I could see myself being coached by? Do I fit with them? We've had guys on, like Soups and some other people, Traz, and it's just saying there's sometimes one, you're going to spend a lot of time with me, and two, I might not be the right fit for some guys. And being able to kind of figure that out in an on-campus camp is invaluable for you, because you can have all that information in front of you. You might not fit well with a certain coaching staff or a certain coaching style, whatever it might be. It might not be the best fit for you, and being able to figure that out in an on-campus camp is great. You're going to get feedback, which is one of the other big ones. One of the biggest things in the recruiting process that you need to have is honest feedback from people on where your skill set lines up. If you go to X camp, and let's say it's a Division I camp, and they don't recruit you, and you get some feedback and they're like, hey, this is where we see you at. You're going to get an honest opinion of what that coaching staff kind of, where they see you fitting in, where you are right now, which is, you need to be able to go through the recruiting process and be honest with yourself so you can find the right fit academically and athletically for you. Some of these on-campus camps, like some of the Division I's, are going to have other coaches working it. I always worked Columbia camp. I worked some other camps out there as well. So I know that there's some of those camps, it's not going to be all the time, but, it's worth asking the question, what other coaches are going to be there? You'll meet the players too. Usually when I was coaching, I would have my players work it. The players will give you a brutally honest answer about what goes on in that program, at the school, everything. So it's a good way to kind of get a lot of information on a school in a day or two setting that you might not otherwise do. The other part, and I think it's probably going to get curbed a little bit more with the new rule, but a lot of people used to always be like, well, I feel like it's a money grab because every time we email them, they say, come to camp. Well, under the old rules, that was the only thing they could email you if you were an underclassman. Hey, come to camp. They could only have camp correspondence with you. So that's why, I think some people have that misnomer and myth about what the on-campus camp. There's so much value in them, and it's generally going to be one of the least expensive options out there for you. You're going to get so much more out of it than you'll ever put into it. And for those reasons, I've always said, and you do, it's the best thing for you to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea that these are money grabs, yes, do some programs help fund their assistants in different areas of their program with the money that they generate from camp? Yeah, absolutely. But I can speak to it, having worked at William and Mary. We flat out recruited out of those camps. Sometimes it was, to your point, we would use that as a mechanism to get to know a kid. Maybe it's the final piece of the evaluation. It's got that built-in campus visit. You get a chance to meet the kid. You get a chance to figure out how they take coaching, how they interact with other players. Um, so that's a huge piece of it. But the other, we'd have kids come to camp that we'd never seen before. And sometimes that led us to go do more homework on guys. And I mean, I don't know what the exact numbers were. I see guys post, well, 40% of our roster. Like, I don't know how true all that is, but to say, I would venture to guess that every single school has multiple kids that have come to one of their camps before. And it is a legitimate way that coaches recruit. The other piece that I think is it's going to increase the value of these camps is the contact rule, the change in that coaches can't have those phone calls prior to August 1st, heading into the player's junior year. So for 25s, that contact's been cut off as of April 26th. Those can't become one of the only mechanisms you have to have any kind of interaction or interface with a kid. And the tough thing about the new rule, I think it's going to make the player evaluation a little bit easier because you're going to have more time to see a guy. Because you don't have to worry about somebody coming in and scooping the kid up with a big offer. You get there's a little bit less pressure to make a decision on the kid, and you're going to get more information to make that decision if you get to see a pitcher throw 3 times, 4 times instead of once, or a position player take 20, 25 at bats instead of maybe you only see him play 1 game, and you get a good recommendation from a coach, right? We all know that guys try to jump on really talented kids early, so I think some of that's going to get curbed. But having talked to a bunch of different coaches, they are actively trying to schedule more on-campus camps this summer for exactly that reason. And the thing that I think is really important for players and parents is, yes, these are incredibly valuable. And I think me and you both are on the same wavelength with this, that I think the on-campus camps they're awesome for a multitude of reasons that you touched on. But I think it's really important for players and parents to have an honest evaluation of where you fit in the college baseball landscape so you can go to camps that are going to be effective for you, right? You need to understand, do I fit at this specific level? Do I fit at this specific level? Do I fit in a program like this? And if you do, if you have this skill set that is going to allow you to be a recruitable player at that particular at that particular program or that particular level of college baseball, then those camps can be worth every penny that you spend to go there, because you get an opportunity to interact with that staff, you get that on-coast visit, you get to showcase in front of them in a more intimate environment than maybe a showcase where there's 200 kids at it, and you need to do something pretty special to stick out. So, with the new change, and I guess this goes back to kind of the fundamentals that we talk about all the time, is like being informed, right? You need to have somebody or someone in your corner who's going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, right? If you're not a guy who can play in the ACC, probably don't need to be spending money to fly down to Georgia Tech's camp because you think you want to play for the Yellow Jackets. Well, if you're not that type of player, you're just wasting a bunch of money to fly down to Georgia Tech, where maybe there's another school that's a little bit closer to you from home that you don't have to fly to, and you fit better there from an athletic perspective. Take advantage of those opportunities. But I love them. And you get seen by other coaches. Like, these coaches bring on a bunch of other schools that aren't really a recruiting threat, but schools that are looking for really talented players, and you get that chance to interact. So it's my favorite way for a guy to get exposure if they do it the right way. I think it can be really valuable. And then you got kind of the natural flow into this is like those invite opportunities, and I think that on the scale of exposure opportunities, the invite stuff is kind of the next big thing. Like, if you're a younger guy and you get you're talented enough to go play in the Garden State games, or you get invited to the New York or New Jersey, or name whatever random state, PBR state games or the Futures games, like those are really good opportunities. And they're a little bit more selective in terms of the players that can go there. And yeah, are they going to cost money? They are, but it's a little bit different than kind of your standard showcase setting where you pay $1,000 and you go and run and maybe play a game. So I'm a big fan of those, and players should certainly take advantage of the opportunity if they get invited to one of those events, because one, it probably means you're pretty good. And two, if you do play in those type of events, they tend to get covered really well, from a coaching perspective, but also there's a social media presence there that helps. So, you got any thoughts on kind of the perfect game PBR stuff?
Of course. I mean, the private showcases they're great in a lot of regards, and I think the best way to kind of attack those is to ask yourself, like, what are you going to get out of it, right? So there's a lot of these companies will run showcases year round. So under the current rules, like, there's going to be a dead period from the mid October all the way through March 1, I think, or February 28 every year. So if you're going to go to a PBR or a perfect game, or enter the company that's running a showcase, there's not going to be a Division 1 school there on November 25th. Not going to be there. Can't, against the rules. And depending on where it is, like, you're not likely to get, you're really only going to get a regional kind of draw for who's in that area. When I was coaching Division 3, like, I wasn't getting on a plane in December and going down to recruit in Florida. Like, it just wasn't in the cards for me. I'm not doing it in January because we're spinning up our season. So knowing what is actually going on from a recruiting landscape on the college side is vital to know. They'll always put in there, so and so has been here before. These colleges have recruited our events. Like, that means they've been at any of the many hundreds of events they run every year. It might not be that specific one. So knowing kind of what you're going to get out of it is huge for you. They can't necessarily guarantee that college coaches are going to be there. It is a good way to get data and metrics and things like that on, for yourself in the recruiting process. A lot of times they'll update your profile on Perfect Game or PBR, things like that, where coaches are, they're going to Google your name and put baseball on the back end of it, and that stuff pops up. They'll kind of be able to see the progression. So it's not it's not always the worst thing in the world. The other is, like, there's not really a whole lot of coaching going into those showcases at all. College coaches can't work them. They're not going to be on the field doing anything with you. Are some of the people that are working there, do they try to do a little bit? Yeah, I think they do. But, it kind of depends on who they are and what they're doing. So it's a little bit different. There is a little bit of a, kind of pressure element to it, which I've always kind of liked. You have all the parents sitting in the stands, all the coaches are sitting in the stands. So, you kind of can get a feel for, a little bit of a bigger moment. Like, what can you do when the lights are on? Because when you get into college, that's what it is, man. Like, you're going to get into games and you're going to compete, and, it matters, so if we want to kind of see how you handle that in that setting. Sometimes that moment could be a little bit too big for you, and that's things that we pay attention to. So, does it mean that you're not going to get recruited? No, it doesn't. But you kind of want to see how guys are going to do when the lights are on and there's a lot of people in the stands and there's college coaches watching, because there's an added element there. So really, for me, it's always kind of been like, hey, what are you going to get out of this showcase? If you were going to, get in front of some coaches, get your name out there, improve your metrics, and update your profile, then yeah, man, like, find a way, to go to one or two. You don't have to do 15 of them. But if you get to one or two of them, maybe at the start of the summer and the end of the summer, and you work through the schedule that is best for you to be able to showcase at those, then you want to put the best version, your best foot forward, and be the best version of yourself in those two. If you're not ready, don't go. I think I don't know how many times I've talked about this, but there's been some showcases that I kind of stopped going to. They're a little bit more of a showcase camp, which we'll get into in a little bit, but I kind of stopped going to in January because you had kids in upstate New York throwing as hard as they can in January, and they're not throwing a meaningful game for 12 weeks. I just didn't really believe in that type of stuff. So it's depending on the part of the country you're from and what you're into, then what your timeline and what your ramp up is and how good you are. If it fits your schedule, it's not a bad option to get seen and have college coaches and get the metrics you're looking for to update your profile.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of things that are really important. One of them is the timing piece, right? And I think the timing is kind of a two-headed monster. One is the timing of when is the camp, right? To your point, if you're going to a showcase event in January, in all likelihood, there's not going to be many coaches there. It's just how the rules work, right? You might have some Division two and Division three schools that have a little bit more flexibility in terms of their ability to get out there in that time of year. But if you're looking to get in front of Division one coaches and you go to a camp in January, that is a private camp. It's not an on-campus camp. Like, there's not going to be Division one coaches there that can't, during that quiet period. So there's the timing of it there. I think there's the timing of it from a ramp up standpoint, specifically with pitchers, is you have to be more concerned with getting yourself ready for your high school season and getting ready for your summer ball season, and be more concerned with health than you do needing to get your numbers into PBR. Because, like, to your point, you see guys who are from the Northeast going out and throwing a max effort 30 pitch bullpen in the middle of January. What's the point, right? You're not throwing a meaningful inning until April. You're probably better off, one, waiting until you're a little bit farther on in your progression to do so, because you'll probably show a little bit better. But two, in all likelihood, you're probably putting yourself at unnecessary injury risk. And one of what's that old saying? The best ability is the availability. And you got to be, if you want to get in front of coaches, you need to be healthy. And if you want to make sure that you're stacking the deck in your favor as much as you can in terms of when you're showcasing, when you're preparing. Like, the off season is about getting better. It's not about trying to showcase yourself. So for those younger guys specifically, if you're 27 or 26, I think there's diminishing value in going to any of those events that early, because one, nobody's calling you, and two, 98% of 27s and 26s, they just need to focus on getting better. And you don't need to spend that money, or you don't need to go and put yourself in a situation where you all likelihood not putting yourself in the best situation for success. And the other thing is timing in terms of where you're at in your development process, right? You want to go and show a tool or a skill set that is going to be recruitable. And if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. It's important to be able to look in the mirror and go, hey, I run a 7.660 right now. I need to get faster in order to be a little bit more recruitable. Or, I throw 77 and I'm a 2025. Like, I need to worry about getting better. I need to add some velocity. I need to add some arm speed. I need to get bigger. I need to get faster. I need to get stronger. So instead of, spending your time going to one of those showcase events, spend your time in the gym. Spend your time with your coaches that are going to help you get better, and understanding that you only get one chance at a first impression. And if you're going to go to one of these events, you want to make sure that you're in a position where you're going to put up some numbers and you're going to put up some metrics that are that may turn a coach's head, because at the end of the day, those events at that time of year, they're metric events, right? They're not recruiting events. It's really about updating your profile. So if you're not going to put up numbers that are, that make you recruitable, don't worry about it. You just focus on getting better. There's nothing wrong with that. I think oftentimes in today's day and age, and I'm hoping that the new contact rule curbs this a little bit, but guys are focused on, in my opinion, the wrong stuff, right? You're focused on, like, what can I post on Instagram? What can I post on Twitter? What's my perfect game ranking? What was my max velo in a 30 pitch bullpen with nobody trying to hit? At the end of the day, the coaches don't really care too much about that stuff. They're going to come and see you play. They're going to be able to pass their own judgment on whether you're fit or not. So don't get lost in don't get distracted by all of that, and really be honest with where you're at and make a good decision in terms of how you're spending that. But, I think, like everything, there's a little bit of nuance to it, and understanding the timing of it is probably one of the big driving factors for the value you're going to get out of one of those events.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the biggest part of this entire recruiting process, regardless of whether it's going to be camps, kind of the private showcases or even the private camps that we'll get into here in a minute. But it's kind of figuring out where you are in your process to be able to put your best foot forward. And sometimes it's going to be a little bit later. Sometimes it is early. But for the vast majority of people, it's going to be, more than likely during and after your junior year in high school. Because people just aren't, they're not mature enough body wise. They're not mature enough physically, mentally, emotionally to really kind of go through that process and do those things. So, there's a lot more that goes into it than just the straight up skill set standpoint. So, it's, you're right. It's nuanced and that's why we're here and that's why we're doing this. Um, the third one that we'll kind of get into here are the private camps and showcases. A little bit more of the head first of the world, the show balls, things like that, where you're going to have a lot of college coaches who are going to be at the event working it. So they're going to be on the field. They're going to be, hitting fungos in the dugout coaching, sitting on the field the entire day. So there's a little bit more that goes into it with them. These generally tend to be the more expensive ones, for the exact reason why I just told you. Like, they're paying the college coaches to be there to work the event. So they got to make sure that they're going to be able to take care of them, for being there for the entirety of the showcase and the camp series. So it is similar to the on campus stuff, and that you're going to be able to kind of get a feel for the coach, or the coaching staff, depending on how many people are there, whether or not you feel like you'd fit in. But you're going to get some face time and kind of be able to say, like, yeah, this seems like a coach I'd like to play for, or you know what, maybe I don't. um, the the biggest thing, I think, when it comes to the head first and the show balls and things, is knowing what you are going to get out of it as well. Some of these camps will do a really good job of getting you all the information that um, you need, and the metrics that you went through, from exit velo to how hard you threw the ball to how fast you ran, things like that. Other ones are a little bit more spotty, with how you can obtain that information. So it's kind of just doing your due diligence and your research on the front end to kind of be like, okay, which one kind of fits what it is that I'm looking to do. Obviously with head first, it's called head first, so it's a little bit more of an academic thing. And as is show ball, they have a lot of the Ivy League schools are there, a lot of the NESCAC schools, there's some other high end academic schools. So if you don't profile as a student who is looking to go into the Ivy League or the Patriot League or the NESCAC, like, it might not be the best camp for you to go to on either end. So you want to make sure that you're kind of looking at what coaches are going to be there, what kind of staffs are going to be there, what do those schools look like, do I profile into that school? Because if you don't, it's kind of similar to, hey, like, you want to go play at Georgia Tech but you can't, like, you're just kind of throwing money away at that point in time. Because if it's all academic schools and you got a 2.8, chances of you being able to get into that school are pretty slow, are pretty slim. So you want to make sure that you do your research on the front end to know that you're going to be in front of coaches of schools that you can actually you're interested in and can probably get into academically. And then the other is, what are you going to get out of it? If you're going to spend this much money, are you going to be able to get your Rapsodo data and your 60 time and you know your exit velo, what you were on the bump, things like that. If you can get that stuff, very easily, and it's super accessible to you, there's something to be said about that. If there's if it's not accessible, or it's a little bit harder to obtain that information, then that you got to figure that out and make the decision that's best for you and your family. But I've worked them. I've worked them both. So I've been there. We've recruited guys out of both of them. We've gotten guys out of both of them. So there's a lot of value there. It can you can really get a really close look at guys, at those camps. So there's value in there for coaches too. Don't think that we're not recruiting those camps, but you want to know, as a player and as a family, when you're spending that much money, like, what are you going to get out of it? And I can promise you, coaches are recruiting, but you also want to know what's in it for you too.
Yeah, I think when you're doing research on those type of camps, right, where if you're academic, like, there's a couple niche camps that do a really good job of that, and you mentioned them both, and I think they both have value for different reasons. You get that interaction with coaches, but regardless of how you're evaluating these, showcase camps, you need to make sure that the schools that are going to be there are ones that you're interested in. And if you go on these websites, you generally get a pretty good idea of who's going to be there. And then the other thing I think that's really important is the format, right? Make sure you understand what the format is going to be. Some of these showcases might only be a workout, which, if you can go really run, or, you've got some juice and you can take some really good BP, you might get on somebody's radar. But for my money, if I'm going to pay, the kind of money that they're asking for there, I want to make sure that I get a chance to play some games. And I know Headfirst and Schobel offer that, for the kind of the quote unquote non-academic world. Academic schools do work these ones. I think Best in the U.S. does one of the better jobs in the country in terms of how they organize their camps. It's a really tightly run workout. The coaches are really engaged, and then there's the game setting where they actually go and play games. They got a nice social media presence. Like, you want to look for a product that's going to make sure that gives you a chance to be exposed to these coaches, and you want to be in a situation where the coaches are engaged and they're actively there recruiting, not just collecting a paycheck. And from my experience, a lot of times it's coach to coach. Certain guys take it more serious than others, but I think some of these organizations do a better job of making sure that these coaches are engaged and they're out there, actively evaluating guys, interacting with players. So understand that format. Once again, from a pitcher's perspective, I think that's really important, right? Know what you're walking into, because you need to prepare for it appropriately. Like, if you're going to go and throw 2 or 3 innings, you're going to prepare differently than if you're throwing a 15 pitch bullpen. So understand that format, make sure you're setting yourself up for success. If you're going to go to these type of workouts, like, you need to put some work in a couple of those measurable departments so that you can show off. Like, if you're going to go run a 60, right? Some guys can just run, and that's great. But for a lot of guys, they need to work at it a little bit. So if you're going to be tested in the 60, you probably should run some 60s beforehand, right? You should probably spend some time working on your speed, working on those first 10 yards, first 30 yards, put in some time and effort to be able to put up a good number, or at least a number that's as good as you can make it be. You don't want to just walk into these one workouts and, you've run the 60 a couple times, but you only ever done it at a showcase. Well, you can get better at that. It's like a lot of things that if you practice it, if you do some fine tuning, you can make your start better. You can make your first 10 yards better. You can finish a little bit stronger, so put in the work necessary to be successful at these showcases. And I think, once again, it comes back to being informed and understanding, when are you ready to go showcase yourself? Are you going to a showcase that is got a list of schools that are attainable, that are of interest to you? That's probably, for me, that's probably the biggest thing is, don't go to a showcase with a bunch of schools you can't play at, or don't go to a showcase with a bunch of schools just to say you went to a showcase, because you're not going to get anything out of it. Make sure that there's guys there that you have interest in, and take advantage of that opportunity. Maybe go introduce yourself to a coach, give them a good handshake, tell them who you are. That's an opportunity for you to make an impression, not just with what you do from a physical perspective, but at these type of camps, you get a chance to interact with coaches and be cognizant of the fact that they're listening to you when you're in the dugout, right? They're going to hear you if you bitch about the umpire, or they're going to hear you if you're standing on the top step rooting for a guy that you've never even played with. Like, coaches notice that stuff, and I think that probably doesn't get talked about enough, that when you're in these showcase settings where the coaches are actively working, the evaluation isn't just how hard you throw and how fast you run. They are actively looking. If they deem you to be a talented enough player for their program, I can guarantee you they are honing in on how you're interacting with other players. What are you talking about in the dugout? How are you going to interact with your parents after the camp? We've talked about this a few times, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future, but how a kid acts with mom and dad is really important. What level of respect is there? Same thing, talking to coaches and talking to players and teammates. That's stuff that coaches hone in on, because we're looking for talented players, but we're also looking for guys that we want to coach. We're looking for good people who are going to be good teammates. Because at the end of the day, when we get to college, it's about winning, and you need a group of individuals all pulling in the right direction. And the last thing is you want is somebody who wants to sit at the end of the dugout and point fingers and talk about dumb stuff that doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. So, for players, I think that's an important thing to understand, is that you are being watched a lot closer than you think when you're not hitting or you're not pitching, and be cognizant of that fact and make sure that you're acting appropriately to make sure you at least don't get crossed off somebody's list. Don't want to do anything egregious where a coach goes, man, I don't want to coach that kid. Don't be that guy, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the head first and those types of camps are, you get a really up close and personal look at a lot of the kids. So you can have a pretty good feel for whether or not you think that kid's going to fit into your program. They said both, a lot of them set aside, specific amount of time to meet with coaches and be able to get in front of them and ask questions and stuff. So, I was a little weird. I actually enjoyed it a little bit. I didn't mind standing out there and meeting a bunch of people and answering questions. So it's, you kind of get a feel, and you get to see where kids are in their maturation and how they're developing, not only as a player but as a person. And it takes a lot for a 15, 16-year-old kid to walk up to a coach he doesn't know and ask some questions and really be engaging and thoughtful in his response. So it tells you a lot about the kid when you're having those conversations. So I always enjoyed it, from that standpoint. So, you're right. There's a lot more eyes on you than you kind of ever really think there are. So, going about your business the right way, regardless of whether or not it's at, the showcase, the on campus, the regular showcase, the private camps, or even just your own games, there's a lot of eyes on you. So, being able to go about your business the right way and make sure you're showing people that you're the guy that they want to recruit is critical at every point in this process. So it'll be good.
Yeah, I think another thing kids can do going into specifically these kind of showcase camps that we're talking about right now is reach out to coaches ahead of camp, right? Like they may not even respond to your email, right? And that's probably worth its own rant. I don't understand why coaches aren't more responsive. I know coaches get a lot of emails, but I know some coaches who won't let an email go unresponded to, and I know some guys that just for some reason can't find the time to do it. And we all know that they have time to do it, but email a coach, because I can promise you that even if they haven't responded, they likely saw it. And if you do something at camp and they look down, they're like, oh, Jimmy Smith, oh, that kid emailed me the other day. Let me take a look at this kid a little bit longer. Like he's got some interest in our program and I think he can do some stuff. Like just a name going over somebody's email, it's a small thing you can do to maybe give yourself a little bit of a leg up, or at least be a name that could be recognizable at a showcase where a coach can say, looking at their list before you guys go to work out, and he starts going through names and, he sees a name that he's had a kid reach out to him before. I can almost guarantee you that guy's going to pay at least a little bit extra attention because you've shown some interest. And yeah, while coaches are always looking for, at the end of the day, players that can help them win games, it's a major bonus if it's a kid who really wants to be there. So there's nothing wrong with reaching out to those coaches and letting them know you're going to be there, getting them your summer schedule, getting them your contact information, maybe getting them some video so that they got an idea of what you can do heading into the showcase. But, little things like that, they may not be the reason you get recruited, but it might be a small step in the right direction where that email could trigger a coach's response just because you took the time to send them a thoughtful email ahead of the showcase. So, doing that kind of stuff matters. And, I think, players need to do it. Mom and dad don't send that email. Kids need to send it, but, that stuff can go a long way, and it's certainly not going to hurt. Basically, I guess that's really what it comes down to, is a little extra time to send that email is not gonna do anything to hurt you in the recruiting process. It can only help.
Yeah. The other is, when you do send your email, just give a 24, 72 hours lead time. I was one of the people who always responded to emails. So um, I actually, people would come up to me and head first be like, I emailed you, you didn't answer. And they'd be standing in front of me and I responded to their email at, 6 that morning. Like, no, you emailed me at 10 o'clock last night and I responded this morning. Like, just be a little, hey, give me an email, a day or two before the event, not 5 hours before the event starts. But no, I agree. Being able to kind of reach out and let people know where you're going to be and what you're doing, it will jog your memory, because you're right. College coaches do get a lot of emails, so if you send an email like, hey, I'm going to be at, X showcase and I know I'm going there, when I, get my list, seeing your name, if I don't remember it right away, is going to jog that kid emailed me. I'll make sure I just lock in and kind of see what he looks like. It's never going to hurt anything. So, taking the time to just introduce yourself via email to say hi, or just, hey, I see that you're going to be there and I'm going to be there too. I look forward to, meeting you. It's fine, because like you said, it stands out, and I'll probably remember what your name is and watch you for a tick longer than maybe I otherwise would have.
Yeah, I think the other, you kind of hit on the timing piece, but like the post camp, whether it's an on campus camp or one of these showcase camps, don't email the coach that night looking for feedback. Like, coaches are traveling, they're trying to spend time with their families. They may be catching a flight home, they may be driving home. Like, give it 48, 72 hours and let them, get settled in, and then send them that email. Hey, coach, it was really good meeting you at camp the other day. Really interested in your program. Do you have any feedback for me? Here's my summer schedule, so on and so forth. But yeah, don't be the guy who sends it, an hour and a half after camp, when you're riding home with mom and dad in the car, and you pop off a really impersonal email asking for feedback. Just give these guys a little bit of time. They work really hard, and they spend a lot of time on the road in the summer, and just be respectful of that. And if you are, most likely they're going to get back to you and at least give you some feedback that you might be able to use to guide the recruiting process and help you move forward.
If you're going to be recruited by that school, like, they're not going to be bashful about it. They're going to reach out to you and let you know. But you're right. Like, there's been countless times I've left camps and it's like, hey, what do you think? It's like, I just watched 1,500 kids over the last 6 days. My head is spinning right now. I give me 24 to 40 hours to digest this information and like go over my notes and give you a thoughtful response to what I saw and what I think. Off the cuff, I'm not going to have a good enough answer. And quite frankly, it's probably going to be rude and impersonal, and it's not going to be, good for either of us. So, like you said, give it a couple hours, or, give it a day or two. Let me digest the information and be able to kind of go over what it is to get you the honest feedback you're looking for, and where I think you would fit in, whether it's with us or not. So it's that timing post camp is just as important as the timing pre camp.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to sum up the camp and showcase thing, I think there's a couple big takeaways that apply to all of this, right? The timing of it is really important, right? And we talked about the PBR perfect game stuff that's in, the quiet period. Like, if you're going to go do that, understand what you're getting out of it. Make sure that you're not putting yourself in a situation where you're increasing the likelihood that you'll get injured because you're not ready to go and showcase that. And then the other timing piece is, are you in a position where you are a recruitable player right now? And that's going to be relative to your class. But having someone in your corner who can guide you, who can give you honest feedback on where you fit, is a really important piece of the puzzle, and I think that trickles down into the on-campus camps as well as the showcase camps that we were just talking about. Is, if you're going to go to these on-campus camps, you need to be informed. You need to make sure that you're going places that make sense. They make sense from an academic perspective. They make sense from a playing perspective. They make sense from a social and a financial perspective. Like, those pieces of the puzzle need to be considered before you just haul off and, take a 4-hour flight someplace just to, ultimately end up getting a t-shirt. So, taking the time to honestly assess where you're at and making sure that you're, effectively and efficiently going about, your exposure opportunities, I think is really where the whole camp and showcase conversation needs to start.
Yeah, the timing piece is going to be the big one from a timeline standpoint for you. What are the rules around the recruiting end of it for Division I, Division II, Division III? Like, can they be there? Can they not? Things like that. And then what are you going to get out of it? If it's, like you said, if you're just going to go get a t-shirt, like, go to fanatics.com and buy one. You'll save a lot of money. But the reality is you want to know where you kind of fit in and have somebody telling you giving you the honest feedback of, hey, you can't play in the ACC. It's going to stink to hear, but there's a lot of people who can't play in the ACC out of high school who end up being really good baseball players. Like, it's okay. Find the place where you fit in and kind of adjust your timeline around, those types of camps and showcases, things like that, to get seen.
Absolutely. And, with that, I think that's probably a good segue into closing this one out. But, for those of you who've been listening to the podcast, we haven't really expanded on this very much, but, that's what Keith and I do is we run EMD baseball. And, with our 25 years of experience together at 3 different levels of NCAA baseball, we've got a lot of experience guiding families. We've done this as coaches, and we have a lot to offer in terms of this information that we're talking about, and we have the ability to layer this over the personal level to really guide the individual so they can get that feedback, so that they can go to the showcases that they need to be at, or the ones that are going to be of value to them. And we take a lot of pride in helping families find the right fit, and ultimately for us, that's really what it's about.
Yeah, that's why we do this podcast. That's why we do what we do. But being able to kind of help families navigate this process is really the rewarding end of what we're doing now. So, like us on YouTube, or subscribe on YouTube, like us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, follow us on wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever. Lock in and listen to the great interviews we have, coming forward, and all the podcasts we'll be releasing here over every week for the next however many weeks.
For the foreseeable future, if you will. But thanks for coming this week. Hope you got something out of the breakdown of the camps and showcases. Like Keith said, check us out on social media. If you guys got any questions, feel free to reach out that way. Otherwise, we hope to have you back next week. Got some good episodes coming up, a couple interviews on the books, and looking forward to continuing to spread some knowledge and hopefully educate some players and parents as they go through the recruiting process. Thanks, everybody.